Alright, so today I want to make a video about Planet of the Humans. Now, I just finished watching it. I would have watched it sooner, but given the amount of stuff that's been going on with the gun ban and the virus and all that kind of stuff, been kind of busy. So, just finished watching it, so I wanted to talk a little bit about it because it's a very important topic because deals with the idea of climate change. Now, it comes at it from a somewhat skeptical point of view. A lot of people think, oh, it's this, climate denying and, fake science and whatever you want to call it. Now, the I mean, the thing that I took away from the movie documentary, whatever you want to call it, is, I mean, number one, a lot of these renewable energy sources, number one, a lot of them aren't actually renewable. For starters, I mean, biomass, for example. Um, the other thing that they don't, they point out, which is a good point, is that a lot of times you have these, countries, areas, companies saying, oh, we're going off coal, but they go to natural gas. Now, natural gas, it does produce less emissions than coal, but it's not renewable. So again, the first big takeaway that you need to, I mean, is the first takeaway is renewables aren't what they're cut out to be. Again, the peoples like the Elon Musks of the world are lying, or at the very least manipulating people when it comes to the renewables, in that they're still a lot more inferior than people make them out to be. Again, you talk to these people all the time, and they're like, "Oh, you could just power your house on wind and solar." I mean, why not? And again, I mean, the first problem is that number one, even if you could do that, you couldn't, especially in an area like Edmonton, because there's a lot of times when it's not sunny and or windy. And the problem, I'll say, oh, what about batteries? Okay, well, the problem is battery. The battery technology is incredibly not even close to advanced enough to do that, because you look at these countries, namely Germany, that have a ton of wind and solar. Most of the power that they catch, they just dump it back onto the grid. And the problem is the battery technology is so poor that people think, oh, you can just store excess power and it's an unlimited supply. No, the problem is batteries can barely store any energy, like literally an incredibly small amount. So that's the first thing to point out. The other thing to point out that they brought up, like I say, a lot of these quote unquote renewables aren't actually, when you think of renewable, they're not actually renewables, like I say, namely biomass. The other big, I mean, I think the two big takeaways, at least that I got from the movie, I don't know if everyone would have got it, but it is the first one being renewables are not nearly, they're a lot more inferior than people think they are. And number two, a lot of people are taking advantage of the government subsidies and the virtue signaling, all this kind of stuff that comes with renewable energy. And that I mean, he blames it on capitalism, which is complete BS. Like, don't even get me started on that. Again, the energy industry is an incredibly regulated industry. So blaming it on the free market is one of the most backward, stupid things you can possibly point out. But again, Michael Moore is a pretty far left guy, so of course, every problem in society is capitalism, no matter what. But the thing to point out is that people are going to come into the industry, take advantage of people, because again, the government is propping the industry up. Again, the wind and solar industry most likely would not even exist other than like obscure like preppers and people who want to live off the grid. Those are the only people that would actually have wind and solar if the government didn't prop it up. That's the big problem, is that the government has spent, I mean, across the world, hundreds of billions of dollars, maybe even trillions at this point, on trying to advance the renewables industry, and it's still incredible. And again, I can't overstate this term, or overstate this, is that the renewable industry is incredibly inferior still. Now, the problem with climate change that I keep pointing out, and again, people just don't really want to deal with it, but the climate change are, the idea that the climate alarmists, the climate change people, the argument goes something like this. We need to get off fossil fuels because it's, number one, it's a finite resource, and number two, we're destroying the planet. And again, the first one's I mean, they're both wrong for different reasons. The first one being, okay, well, if we can, if first of all, the problem is that people think that it's a finite resource and that we're going to run out of it in our lifetime. There's literally hundreds of years, maybe even thousands of years of fossil fuels still left. So, there's regular discoveries of fossil fuel, oil and gas reserves like that are discovered, that can power the world for like decades, and that's just individual discoveries. So again, the idea that we're going to run out of oil and gas anytime soon is completely BS. It's complete BS. Um, so again, people who bring that up, again, that's a terrible argument. It's not true. It's not. I mean, technically, yes, it is a finite resource, but we're talking hundreds, most likely thousands of years before we would ever have to worry about running out of, maybe not thousands, but well into the hundreds of years, before we actually are going to quote unquote run out of oil and gas. So again, that's a terrible argument. The other, and the other thing to point out too is that they say, well, okay, we're gonna run out of fossil fuels at some point. It's a finite resource. Okay, well, under that theory, the government shouldn't be running massive amounts of debt, because if doing things that aren't sustainable is a bad thing, which they are, um, we shouldn't be running massive amounts of debt. Like, again, you should be for the government running balanced budgets. Now, the problem with that is that the government wouldn't be able to give people free health care and massive amounts of welfare. So again, you conveniently ignore that. Again, which is something I like to point out. Now, the other aspect of it is, oh, we're destroying the planet. And again, I've made tons of videos on it. Again, I just put out a video um, on the CO2 levels being virtually unchanged over the last month, even though massive amounts of the economy pretty much around the world have been shut down, which again just goes to show that we're not having much of, if at all, an effect on the planet. And again, I've made plenty of other videos on it. Again, just going over, I don't have time to go over a very in-depth, detailed review, idea of climate change not being a thing and why I don't think it's a thing. But again, like I say, there's several things. I mean, number one, the hottest years on record were almost all a long time ago. Um, the official numbers from Environment Canada, I believe, show a zero point 0.1 degree increase over the last about since the 80s. And not to mention, too, is that a small mini ice age ended in the early 80s. So again, they took it at a slightly colder time than the average. So again, a 0.1%, or sorry, a zero point 0.1 degree change is literally not even noticeable. Not even noticeable. Um, so that's the first thing to point out too, is that when you ask these people, it's, oh, the temperature's going up. Yeah, they don't know anything. They're just believing other people's words. Now again, people who just take other people's word for stuff, again, I don't trust. I don't care what side of the spectrum you're on. I don't believe you, because people could literally tell you anything and you would just believe them. The other things they bring up is, okay, well, like I say, CO2, the whole human, CO2 connection is not true, not true at all. For the simple reason, again, the hottest years on record happened at a time when CO2 was quite a bit lower than it is now. There were points in time in history, in the Earth's history, when CO2 levels were like 20 times higher than they are right now. How do you explain that? Like, how do you explain that? Um, there's also, like I say, you take the Australian wildfires, for example. The worst year of Australian wildfires happened in the 1800s. The worst year of flooding in Australia also happened in the 1800s. So again, the whole, um, wildfires, hurricanes, flooding, there's more of that happening right now, also is not true. So again, those are just a few things to bring up. Like I say, I don't have enough time to go super in depth, but the whole idea that we're destroying the planet, therefore we have to go off fossil fuels, it's not a good argument. It's not a good argument. Now, the real reason they want to do that is to implement more socialist policies. And again, one of the architects of the Green New Deal admitted that. Again, it's not people say, oh, you're conspiracy theorists. No, they literally admit it. They literally admit it. Again, read over the Green New Deal. There's more stuff about social justice warrior BS issues than there is about the environment and the green industry or whatever. So again, they don't care. I mean, they care a little bit, but the main goal is socialism. Like, let's just be honest. So that's the thing I wanted to point out. Now, again, This movie obviously doesn't make the case, or we need to go completely off oil and gas, and we need socialism. To be fair, I want to point that out, but again, I'm just talking about the whole movement in general. And the problem, one of the things that they kind of expose the corruption that's already starting to go on in the industry. And the problem is that because, like I say, the industry is so propped up, and there's clearly such amount of profit to be made in the industry, you're going to attract people who want to exploit people who want to do corrupt things. Like I say, that stuff's inevitable to happen when you create a artificially increased demand for something. So again, that's basically I mean, it's my opinion. It's a decent documentary. It's not great, but I mean, I would suggest watching it because again, it gives you a different point of view. Again, people who give you different points of views on things, it's always a good thing to check out. Um, and again, the more you can always tell a sign of someone who, or a group of people who really, their groups are really shrouded in fact and reason and evidence, and that they can entertain other ideas for the simple reason that their ideas are make more sense. They have more reason and evidence behind their beliefs. Now, people who have no reason and evidence, no truth behind their beliefs, are people who generally want to censor, refuse to acknowledge the other side. And again, that tends to be the left. That tends to be the climate alarmists, the socialists, all these kind of people. So, yeah, basically that's like what I would say. It's worth watching, but again, it's nothing special. It definitely did teach me some things. I mean, number one, in that, like I say, a lot of these I mean, a lot of times people say, oh, we're going off coal. It's this great thing, but what they don't tell you is that they're going to natural gas. Now, natural gas is still very good. It's not a renewable, but again, um, we're never going to go off renewables anytime soon. Like I said, this is a prediction here too. The only way we go off renewables within anybody who's alive right now's lifetime is if the government literally forces it down our throat. And I mean literally force it down our throat because we're nowhere near renewables being as competitive as oil and gas to need to do that. And the other problem too is that it's only a matter of time until people start to realize that, hey, scientists and these climate alarmists have been making doomsday predictions for decades now, and none of them have came. I mean, it should have been enough already for people to wake up, but apparently it isn't for some reason. But eventually, people are going to wake up to, hey, you guys have been making doomsday predictions for 100 years and nothing has happened. I don't believe you anymore. And I think that the government will push to go completely wind and solar and renewable before that happens. So when people do realize that, it'll be too late. So again, that's my prediction. Now, in a more realistic, well, not realistic, but in a how it would work in an actual non-communist socialist way of going about things is that we would wait for renewables to become superior. And that's the one thing I point out too is that I'm not anti-renewables. I'm only, like I said, I'll put it this way: the day that renewables become cheaper, more cost-effective, um, superior in the majority of ways, I would be perfectly fine going towards renewables. The problem is that they're nowhere near that point, like not even close. And the premise for going off oil and gas and to renewables, it doesn't even make sense in the first place. So that's why I would say is that the only way that we ever go completely towards renewables, which at this point it's impossible. Again, even if you wanted to go 100% renewable right now, you couldn't, especially in somewhere like Canada. The first day where it's not windy and or sunny, and it's minus 20 outside, the pipes are going to freeze in your house. You very well could die. And again, you're going to be in for a massive, you're going to have quite the bill on your hands to fix up your house because, again, your pipes are going to freeze. You're not going to have running water. You're not going to be able to heat your house. And that's the other problem, too. So, anyway, I have kind of talked about enough about this. Like I say, check it out if you want. It's nothing special, but I would suggest always anybody who's questioning the narrative. Again, that's I guess the one thing to point out too is that any perspective that's questioning the narrative, I support no matter what it is. Now again, to differing degrees, obviously not the same, but to differing degrees. So again, check it out. But anyway, I'm gonna leave the video there. If you'd like to make sure to like and subscribe, check out my PayPal and email. I got linked in the description. I appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe. And last couple things, as always, check out my BitChute channel if you haven't already, and check me out on Twitter if you haven't already.